Benjamin Netanyahu.
Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu, Arabic, Bnymynnntnyhw. Born October 21, 1949, is an Israeli politician and the current Prime Minister of Israel. He also currently serves as a member of the Knesset, the chairman of the Likud party and Minister of Public Diplomacy and Diaspora Affairs. Born in Tel Aviv to secular Jewish parents, Netanyahu is the first Israeli prime minister born in Israel after the establishment of the state. Netanyahu joined the Israel Defense Forces during the Six-Day War in 1967, and became a team leader in the Sayeret Matkal Special Forces Unit. He took part in many missions, including Operation Inferno, 1968, Operation Gift, 1968, and Operation Isotope, 1972, during which he was shot in the shoulder. He fought on the front lines in the War of Attrition and the Yom Kippur War in 1973, taking part in Special Forces raids along the Suez Canal, and then leading a commando assault deep into Syrian territory. He achieved the rank of captain before being discharged. Netanyahu served as the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations from 1984 to 1988, member of the Likud party, and was prime minister from June 1996 to July 1999. He moved from the political arena to the private sector after being defeated in the 1999 election for prime minister by Ehud Barak. Netanyahu returned to politics in 2002 as foreign affairs minister, 2002 to 2003, and finance minister, 2003 to 2005, in Ariel Sharon's governments, but he departed the government over disagreements regarding the Gaza disengagement plan. He retook the Likud leadership in December 2005, after Sharon left to form a new party. In the 2006 election, Likud did poorly, winning 12 seats. In December 2006, Netanyahu became the official leader of the opposition in the Knesset and chairman of Likud. In 2007, he retained the Likud leadership by beating Moshe Feiglin in party elections. Following the 2009 parliamentary election, in which Likud placed second and right-wing parties won a majority, Netanyahu formed a coalition government. After the victory in the 2013 elections, he became the second person to be elected to the position of prime minister for a third term, after Israel's founder David Ben-Gurion. Netanyahu's older brother, Yonatan Netanyahu, commander of Sayeret Matkal, was killed in 1976 while commanding the ground assault element during Operation Entebbe. His younger brother, Ido Netanyahu, is a playwright. Their father, Benzion Netanyahu, was an Israeli historian. In 2005, Netanyahu was voted the 18th greatest Israeli of all time, in a poll by the Israeli news website Ynet to determine whom the general public considered the 200 greatest Israelis. In 2012, Netanyahu was listed 23rd on the Forbes magazine's list of the world's most powerful people. In 2013, he was ranked third on the list of the most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. He had been ranked first on the list in 2012 and 2010.
Biography. Early life and career.
Netanyahu was born in 1949 in Tel Aviv, to Zila, née Siegel. August 28, 1912 – January 31, 2000, and Professor Benzion Netanyahu, 1910 to 2012, the middle of three children. He was initially raised and educated in Jerusalem, where he attended the Henrietta Szold Elementary School. A copy of his evaluation from his sixth-grade teacher Ruth Rubenstein revealed that Netanyahu was courteous, polite, helpful, his work was responsible and punctual, and that Netanyahu was friendly, disciplined, cheerful, brave, active and obedient. Between 1956 and 1958, and again from 1963 to 1967, his family lived in the United States in Cheltenham Township, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Philadelphia, where he attended and graduated from the Cheltenham High School and was active in a debate club. To this day, he speaks American English with a Philadelphia accent. After graduating from high school in 1967, Netanyahu returned to Israel to enlist in the IDF. He trained as a combat soldier and became a team leader in an elite special forces unit of the IDF, Sayeret Matkal. He took part in numerous cross-border assault raids during the 1969-70 War of Attrition. He was involved in many other missions, including Operation Inferno, 1968, and the rescue of the hijacked Sabena Flight 571 in May 1972, in which he was shot in the shoulder. After his army service, Netanyahu returned to the United States in late 1972 to study architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He returned to Israel in October 1973 to serve in the Yom Kippur War for a 40-day period. While there, he fought in Special Forces raids along the Suez Canal, as well as leading a commando team deep into Syrian territory. He then returned to the United States and eventually completed an SB degree in architecture in 1975 and earned an SM degree from the MIT Sloan School of Management in 1977. Concurrently, he studied political science at Harvard University. At that time he changed his name to Benjamin Ben Nittai, Nittai, a reference to both Mount Nittai and to the eponymous Jewish sage Nittai of Arbela, was a pen name often used by his father for articles. Years later, in an interview with the media, Netanyahu clarified that he decided to do so to make it easier for Americans to pronounce his name. This fact has been used by his political rivals to accuse him indirectly of a lack of Israeli national identity and loyalty. In 1976 Netanyahu lost his older brother Yonatan Netanyahu. Yonatan was serving as the commander of Benjamin's former unit, the Sayeret Matkal, and was killed in action during the counter-terrorism hostage rescue mission Operation Entebbe, in which his unit rescued more than 100 Israeli hostages hijacked by terrorists and flown to the Entebbe airport in Uganda. At MIT, Netanyahu graduated near the top of his class, and was recruited as a management consultant for the Boston Consulting Group in Boston, Massachusetts, working at the company between 1976 and 1978. At the Boston Consulting Group, he was a colleague of Mitt Romney. Romney remembers that Netanyahu at the time was a strong personality with a distinct point of view. In 1978, Netanyahu returned to Israel. Between 1978 and 1980 he ran the Jonathan Netanyahu Anti-Terror Institute, a non-governmental organization devoted to the study of terrorism. The institute held a number of international conferences focused on the discussion of international terrorism. From 1980 to 1982 he was director of marketing for RIM Industries in Jerusalem. During this period Netanyahu made his first connections with several Israeli politicians, including Minister Moshe Arens, who appointed him as his deputy chief of mission at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., a position he held from 1982 until 1984. Between 1984 and 1988 Netanyahu served as the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. It was then that Netanyahu met the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson.
Early political career, 1988 to 1996.
Prior to the 1988 Israeli legislative election Netanyahu returned to Israel and joined the Likud party. In the Likud's internal elections, Netanyahu was placed fifth on the party list. Later on he was elected as a Knesset member of the 12th Knesset, and was appointed as a deputy of the foreign minister Moshe Arens, and later on David Levy. Netanyahu and Levy did not cooperate and the rivalry between the two only intensified afterwards. During the Madrid Conference of 1991 Netanyahu was among members of the Israeli delegation headed by Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir. After the Madrid Conference Netanyahu was appointed as deputy minister in the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Following the defeat of the Likud party in the 1992 Israeli legislative elections the Likud party held a primary election in 1993 to select its leader, and Netanyahu was victorious, defeating Benny Begin, son of the late Prime Minister Menachem Begin, and veteran politician David Levy. Sharon initially sought Likud party leadership as well, but quickly withdrew when it was evident that he was attracting minimal support. Shamir retired from politics shortly after the Likud's defeat in the 1992 elections. Following the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, his temporary successor Shimon Peres decided to call early elections in order to give the government a mandate to advance the peace process. Netanyahu was the Likud's candidate for prime minister in the 1996 Israeli legislative election, which took place on May 26, 1996, and were the first Israeli elections in which Israelis elected their prime minister directly. Netanyahu hired American Republican political operative Arthur Finkelstein to run his campaign, and although the American style of sound bites and sharp attacks elicited harsh criticism from inside Israel, it proved effective. The method was later copied by Ehud Barak during the 1999 election campaign, in which he beat Netanyahu. Netanyahu won the election, becoming the youngest person in the history of the position and the first Israeli prime minister to be born in the State of Israel. Yitzhak Rabin was born in Jerusalem, under the British Mandate of Palestine, prior to the 1948 founding of the Israeli state. Netanyahu's victory over the pre-election favorite Shimon Peres surprised many. The main catalyst in the downfall of the latter was a wave of suicide bombings shortly before the elections. On 3 and 4 March 1996, Palestinians carried out 2 suicide bombings, killing 32 Israelis, with Peres seemingly unable to stop the attacks. Unlike Peres, Netanyahu did not trust Yasser Arafat and conditioned any progress at the peace process on the Palestinian National Authority fulfilling its obligations, mainly fighting terrorism, and ran with the campaign slogan Netanyahu, making a safe peace. However, although Netanyahu won the election for prime minister, Labour won the Knesset elections, beating the Likud-Geshed Zemet alliance, meaning Netanyahu had to rely on a coalition with the ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and UTJ, whose social welfare policies flew in the face of his capitalistic outlook, in order to govern.
First premiership, 1996 to 1999.
A spate of suicide bombings reinforced the Likud position for security. Hamas claimed responsibility for most of the bombings. As Prime Minister, Netanyahu raised many questions about many central premises of the Oslo peace process. One of his main points was disagreement with the Oslo premise that the negotiations should proceed in stages, meaning that concessions should be made to Palestinians before any resolution was reached on major issues, such as the status of Jerusalem, and the amending of the Palestinian National Charter. Oslo supporters had claimed that the multi-stage approach would build goodwill among Palestinians and would propel them to seek reconciliation when these major issues were raised in later stages. Netanyahu said that these concessions only gave encouragement to extremist elements, without receiving any tangible gestures in return. He called for tangible gestures of Palestinian goodwill in return for Israeli concessions. Despite his stated differences with the Oslo Accords, Prime Minister Netanyahu continued their implementation, but his premiership saw a marked slowdown in the peace process. In 1996, Netanyahu and Jerusalem's Mayor Ehud Olmert decided to open an exit in the Arab Quarter for the Western Wall Tunnel, which prior Prime Minister Shimon Peres had instructed to be put on hold for the sake of peace. This sparked 3 days of rioting by Palestinians, resulting in both Israelis and Palestinians being killed. In January 1997, Netanyahu signed the Hebron Protocol with the Palestinian Authority, which resulted in the redeployment of Israeli forces in Hebron and the turnover of civilian authority in much of the area to the Palestinian Authority. Eventually, the lack of progress of the peace process led to new negotiations, which produced the Wye River Memorandum in 1998, which detailed the steps to be taken by the Israeli government and Palestinian Authority to implement the earlier interim agreement of 1995. It was signed by Netanyahu and PLO chairman Yasser Arafat, and on November 17, 1998, Israel's 120-member parliament, the Knesset, approved the Wye River Memorandum by a vote of 75-19. As Prime Minister, Netanyahu emphasized a policy of 3 no's: no withdrawal from the Golan Heights, no discussion of the case of Jerusalem, no negotiations under any preconditions. During his term, Netanyahu also began a process of economic liberalization, taking steps towards a free market economy. Under his watch, the government began selling its shares in banks and major state-run companies. Netanyahu also abolished all of Israel's strict foreign exchange controls, enabling Israelis to take an unrestricted amount of money out of the country, open foreign bank accounts, hold foreign currency, and invest freely in other countries. Throughout his term, Netanyahu was opposed by the political left wing in Israel and also lost support from the right because of his concessions to the Palestinians in Hebron and elsewhere, and due to his negotiations with Arafat generally. Netanyahu lost favor with the Israeli public after a long chain of scandals involving his marriage and corruption charges. In 1997, police recommended that Netanyahu be indicted on corruption charges for influence peddling. He was accused of appointing an attorney general who would reduce the charges, and prosecutors ruled that there was insufficient evidence to go to trial. In 1999, Netanyahu faced another scandal when the Israel police recommended that he be tried for corruption for $100,000 in free services from a government contractor. Israel's attorney general did not prosecute, citing difficulties with evidence. After being defeated by Ehud Barak in the 1999 election for prime minister, Netanyahu temporarily retired from politics. He subsequently served as a senior consultant with Israeli communications equipment developer BATM for 2 years.
Political downturn and recovery, 2000 to 2003.
With the fall of the Barak government in late 2000, Netanyahu expressed his desire to return to politics. By law, Barak's resignation was supposed to lead to elections for the prime minister position only. Netanyahu insisted that general elections should be held, claiming that otherwise it would be impossible to have a stable government. Netanyahu decided eventually not to run for the prime minister position, a move which facilitated the surprising rise to power of Ariel Sharon, who at the time was considered less popular than Netanyahu. In 2002, after the Israeli Labour Party left the coalition and vacated the position of foreign minister, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon appointed Netanyahu as foreign minister. Netanyahu challenged Sharon for the leadership of the Likud party, but failed to oust Sharon. On September 9, 2002, a scheduled speech by Netanyahu at Concordia University in Montreal, Quebec, Canada was cancelled after hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters overwhelmed security and smashed through a glass window. Netanyahu was not present at the protest, having remained at Montreal's Ritz-Carlton Hotel throughout the duration. He later accused the activists of supporting terrorism and mad zealotry. Weeks later, on October 1, 2002, around 200 protesters met Netanyahu outside his Heinz Hall appearance in Pittsburgh. Although Pittsburgh police, Israeli security and a Pittsburgh SWAT unit allowed his speeches to continue downtown at the hall and the Duquesne Club as well as suburban Robert Morris University. On September 12, 2002, Netanyahu testified, under oath as a private citizen, before the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Government Reform regarding the nuclear threat posed by the Iraqi regime. There is no question whatsoever that Saddam is seeking and is working and is advancing towards the development of nuclear weapons, no question whatsoever, he said. And there is no question that once he acquires it, history shifts immediately. Netanyahu and other high-rank officials from different countries had suspected that Iraq could develop a nuclear capability, as the country began building a nuclear power plant program in 1959 with the USSR.
Finance Minister, 2003 to 2005.
After the 2003 Israeli legislative election, in what many observers regarded as a surprise move, Sharon offered the foreign ministry to Silvan Shalom and offered Netanyahu the finance ministry. Some pundits speculated that Sharon made the move because he deemed Netanyahu a political threat given his demonstrated effectiveness as foreign minister, and that by placing him in the finance ministry during a time of economic uncertainty, he could diminish Netanyahu's popularity. Netanyahu accepted the new appointment after Sharon agreed to provide him with an unprecedented level of independence in running the ministry. As finance minister, Netanyahu undertook an economic plan in order to restore Israel's economy from its low point during the Second Intifada. The plan involved a move toward more liberalized markets, although it was not without its critics. Netanyahu succeeded in passing several long unresolved reforms, including an important reform in the banking system. However, opponents in the Labour Party, and even a few within his own Likud, viewed Netanyahu's policies as Thatcherite attacks on the venerated Israeli social safety net. Netanyahu threatened to resign from office in 2004 unless the Gaza pull-out plan was put to a referendum. He later modified the ultimatum and voted for the program in the Knesset, indicating immediately thereafter that he would resign unless a referendum was held within 14 days. He submitted his resignation letter on August 7, 2005, shortly before the Israeli cabinet voted 17-5 to approve the initial phase of withdrawal from Gaza.
Likud leader and opposition leader, 2005 to 2009.
Following the withdrawal of Sharon from the Likud, Netanyahu was one of several candidates who vied for the Likud leadership. His most recent attempt prior to this was in September 2005 when he had tried to hold early primaries for the position of the head of the Likud party, while the party held the office of Prime Minister, thus effectively pushing Ariel Sharon out of office. The party rejected this initiative. Netanyahu retook the leadership on December 20, 2005, with 47% of the primary vote, to 32% for Silvan Shalom and 15% for Moshe Feiglin. In the March 2006 Knesset elections, Likud took the third place behind Kadima and Labour, and Netanyahu served as leader of the opposition. On August 14, 2007, Netanyahu was re-elected as chairman of the Likud and its candidate for the post of prime minister with 73% of the vote, against far-right candidate Moshe Feiglin and World Likud chairman Danny Dornan. He opposed the 2008 Israel-Hamas ceasefire, like others in the Knesset opposition. Specifically, Netanyahu said, "This is not a relaxation, it's an Israeli agreement to the rearming of Hamas. What are we getting for this?" In the first half of 2008, doctors removed a small colon polyp that proved to be benign. Following Livni's election to head Kadima and Olmert's resignation from the post of prime minister, Netanyahu declined to join the coalition Livni was trying to form and supported new elections, which were held in February 2009. Netanyahu was the Likud's candidate for prime minister in the 2009 Israeli legislative election, which took place on February 10, 2009, as Zvi Livni, the previous designated acting prime minister under the Olmert government, had been unable to form a viable governing coalition. Opinion polls showed Likud in the lead, but with as many as a third of Israeli voters undecided. In the election itself, Likud won the second highest number of seats, Livni's party having outnumbered the Likud by 1 seat. A possible explanation for Likud's relatively poor showing is that some Likud supporters defected to Avigdor Lieberman's Israel B'Light new party. Netanyahu, however, claimed victory on the basis that right-wing parties won the majority of the vote, and on February 20, 2009, Netanyahu was designated by Israeli President Shimon Peres to succeed Ehud Olmert as prime minister, and began his negotiations to form a coalition government. Despite right-wing parties winning a majority of 65 seats in the Knesset, Netanyahu preferred a broader centrist coalition and turned to his Kadima rivals, chaired by Zvi Livni, to join his government. This time it was Livni's turn to decline to join, with a difference of opinion on how to pursue the peace process being the stumbling block. Netanyahu did manage to entice a smaller rival, the Labour Party, chaired by Ehud Barak, to join his government, giving him a certain amount of centrist tone. Netanyahu presented his cabinet for a Knesset vote of confidence on March 31, 2009. The 32nd government was approved that day by a majority of 69 lawmakers to 45, with 5 abstaining, and the members were sworn in.
Second premiership, 2009 to 2013.
In 2009, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton voiced support for the establishment of a Palestinian state, a solution not endorsed by Prime Minister-designate Benjamin Netanyahu, with whom she had earlier pledged the United States cooperation. Upon the arrival of President Obama administration's special envoy, George Mitchell, Netanyahu said that any furtherance of negotiations with the Palestinians would be conditioned on the Palestinians recognizing Israel as a Jewish state. U.S. President Barack Obama told Netanyahu that a two-state solution was a priority and called for settlement growth to be frozen, while Netanyahu refused to support the creation of a Palestinian state and stated that Israel has the right to continue settlements. During President Obama's Cairo speech on June 4, 2009, in which Obama addressed the Muslim world, Obama stated, among other things, that the United States does not accept the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlements. Following Obama's Cairo speech, Netanyahu immediately called a special government meeting. On June 14, 10 days after Obama's Cairo speech, Netanyahu gave a speech at Bar-Ilan University in which he endorsed a demilitarized Palestinian state, though said that Jerusalem must remain the unified capital of Israel. Netanyahu stated that he would accept a Palestinian state if Jerusalem were to remain the united capital of Israel, the Palestinians would have no army, and the Palestinians would give up their demand for a right of return. He also argued the right for a natural growth in the existing Jewish settlements in the West Bank while their permanent status is up to further negotiation. Senior Palestinian official, Sabah Rekit, said that the speech had closed the door to permanent status negotiations due to Netanyahu's declarations on Jerusalem, refugees and settlements. 3 months after starting his term, Netanyahu remarked that his cabinet already had achieved several notable successes, such as the establishment of a working national unity government, and a broad consensus for a two-state solution. A July 2009 survey by Haaretz found that most Israelis support the Netanyahu government, giving him a personal approval rating of about 49%. Netanyahu has lifted checkpoints in the West Bank in order to allow freedom of movement and a flow of imports, a step that resulted in an economic boost in the West Bank. In 2009, Netanyahu welcomed the Arab Peace Initiative, also known as the Saudi Peace Initiative, and also lauded a call by Bahrain's Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa to normalize relations with Israel. In August 2009, Abbas declared that he would be willing to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN General Assembly, where Netanyahu had accepted President Obama's invitation for a triple summit, although he said it would not necessarily lead to negotiations. Netanyahu was reported to be in a pivotal moment over these understandings, that were reported to include a compromise over permission on continuing the already approved construction in the West Bank in exchange for freezing all settlements thereafter, as well as continuing building in East Jerusalem, and at the same time stopping the demolition of houses of Arab inhabitants there. On September 4, 2009, it was reported that Netanyahu was to agree to settlers' political demands to approve more settlement constructions before a temporary settlement freeze agreement took place. White House spokesman Robert Gibbs expressed regret over the move. However, one U.S. official said the move will not derail train. On September 7, 2009, Netanyahu left his office without reporting where he was headed. The Prime Minister's military secretary, Major General Mukhalfi, later reported Netanyahu had visited a security facility in Israel. Several different news agencies reported several different stories about where he was. On September 9, 2009, Yedioth Ahronoth reported that the Israeli leader had made a secret flight to Moscow to try to persuade Russian officials not to sell S-300 anti-aircraft missile systems to Iran. Headlines branded Netanyahu a liar, and dubbed the affair a fiasco. It was later reported that the PM's military secretary will be dismissed due to the affair. The Sunday Times reported that the trip was made to share the names of Russian scientists that Israel believes are abetting the alleged Iranian nuclear weapons program. On September 24, 2009, in an address to the United Nations General Assembly in New York, Netanyahu said Iran poses a threat to the peace of the world and that it is incumbent on the world body to prevent the Islamic Republic from obtaining nuclear weapons. Waving the blueprints for Auschwitz and invoking the memory of his own family members murdered by the Nazis, Netanyahu delivered a passionate and public riposte to Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's questioning of the Holocaust, asking, "Have you no shame?" In response to pressure from the Obama administration urging the sides to resume peace talks, on November 25, 2009 Netanyahu announced a partial 10-month settlement construction freeze plan. The announced partial freeze had no significant effect on actual settlement construction, according to an analysis by the major Israeli daily Haaretz. U.S. Special Envoy George Mitchell said, while the United States shares Arab concerns about the limitations of Israel's gesture, it is more than any Israeli government has ever done. In his announcement, Netanyahu called the move a painful step that will encourage the peace process, and urged the Palestinians to respond. The Palestinians rejected the call, stating the gesture was insignificant and that thousands of recently approved settlement buildings in the West Bank would continue to be built and there would be no freeze of settlement activity in East Jerusalem. In March 2010, Israel's government approved construction of an additional 1,600 apartments in a large Jewish housing development in northern East Jerusalem called Ramat Shlomo, despite the position of the current U.S. government that acts such as this thwart the peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians. The Israeli government's announcement occurred during a visit by U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, and the U.S. government subsequently issued a strongly worded condemnation of the plan. Netanyahu subsequently issued a statement that all previous Israeli governments had continuously permitted construction in the neighborhood, and that certain neighborhoods such as Ramat Shlomo and Shiloh have always been included as part of Israel in any final agreement plan that has been proposed by either side to date. Netanyahu regretted the timing of the announcement but asserted that our policy on Jerusalem is the same policy followed by all Israeli governments for the 42 years, and it has not changed. In September 2010, Netanyahu agreed to enter direct talks, mediated by the Obama administration, with the Palestinians for the first time in a long while. The ultimate aim of these direct talks is to forge the framework of an official final status settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by forming a two-state solution for the Jewish people and the Palestinian people. On September 27, the 10-month settlement freeze ended, and the Israeli government approved new construction in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. On retiring from office in July 2011, former U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates had said that Netanyahu was ungrateful to the United States and endangering Israel. Responding, the Likud party defended Netanyahu by saying that most Israelis supported the prime minister and that he had broad support in the United States. In 2011, social justice protests broke out across Israel. Hundreds of thousands of people protested Israel's high cost of living throughout the country. In response, Netanyahu appointed the Trautenberg Committee, headed by Professor Manuel Trautenberg, to examine the problems and propose solutions. The committee submitted recommendations to lower the high cost of living in September 2011. Although Netanyahu promised to push the proposed reforms through the cabinet in one piece, differences inside his coalition resulted in the reforms being gradually adopted. In 2012, Netanyahu initially planned to call early elections, but subsequently oversaw the creation of a controversial government of national unity to see Israel through until the national elections of 2013. In May 2012, Netanyahu officially recognized for the first time the right for Palestinians to have their own state, though as before he declared it would have to be demilitarized. On October 25, 2012, Netanyahu and Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman announced that their respective political parties, Likud and Diaspora, had merged and would run together on a single ballot in Israel's January 22, 2013 general elections.
Third Premiership, 2013-present.
The 2013 election returned Netanyahu's Likud Israel Beitenu coalition with 11 fewer seats than the combined Likud and Israel Beitenu parties had going into the vote. Nevertheless, as leader of what remained the largest faction in the Knesset, Israeli President Shimon Peres charged Netanyahu with the task of forming the 33rd government of Israel. The new coalition included the Yesh Atid, the Jewish Home and Hatnuah parties and excludes the ultra-Orthodox parties at the insistence of Yesh Atid and the Jewish Home. During Netanyahu's third term, he continued his policy of economic liberalization. In December 2013, the Knesset approved the Business Concentration Law, which intended to open Israel's highly concentrated economy to competition to lower consumer prices, reduce income inequality, and increase economic growth. Netanyahu had formed the Concentration Committee in 2010, and the bill, which was pushed forward by his government, implemented its recommendations. The new law banned multi-tiered corporate holding structures, in which a CEO's family members or other affiliated individuals held public companies which in turn owned other public companies, and who were thus able to engage in price gouging. Under the law, corporations were banned from owning more than 2 tiers of publicly listed companies, and from holding both financial and non-financial enterprises. All conglomerates were given 4 to 6 years to sell excess holdings. Netanyahu also began a campaign of port privatization to break what he viewed as the monopoly held by workers of the Israel Port Authority, so as to lower consumer prices and increase exports. In July 2013, he issued tenders for the construction of private ports in Haifa and Ashdod. Netanyahu has also pledged to curb excess bureaucracy and regulations to ease the burden on industry.
Political positions. Oslo Accords.
Netanyahu opposed the Oslo Accords from their inception. During his term as Prime Minister in the late 1990s, Netanyahu consistently reneged on commitments made by previous Israeli governments as part of the Oslo peace process, leading American peace envoy Dennis Ross to note that, neither President Clinton nor Secretary Albright believed that Bibi had any real interest in pursuing peace. In a 2001 video, Netanyahu, reportedly unaware he was being recorded, said, "They asked me before the election if I'd honor, I said I would, but I'm going to interpret the accords in such a way that would allow me to put an end to this galloping forward to the 67 borders." How did we do it? Nobody said what defined military zones were. Defined military zones are security zones. As far as I'm concerned, the entire Jordan Valley is a defined military zone. Go argue. However, this is clearly consistent with Yitzhak Rabin's October 1995 statement at the Knesset on the ratification of the Interim Oslo Agreement, b. The security border of the State of Israel will be located in the Jordan Valley, in the broadest meaning of that term.
Prior to second term as Prime Minister.
Netanyahu had previously called US-backed peace talks a waste of time, while at the same time refusing to commit to the same two-state solution as had other Israeli leaders, until a speech in June 2009. He repeatedly made public statements which advocated an economic peace approach, meaning an approach based on economic cooperation and joint effort rather than continuous contention over political and diplomatic issues. This is in line with many significant ideas from the Peace Valley Plan. He raised these ideas during discussions with former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Netanyahu continued to advocate these ideas as the Israeli elections approached. Netanyahu has said, in January 2009, prior to the February 2009 Israeli elections, Netanyahu informed Middle East envoy Tony Blair that he would continue the policy of the Israeli governments of Ariel Sharon and Ehud Olmert by expanding settlements in the West Bank, in contravention of the roadmap, but not building new ones.
Bar-Ilan speech.
On June 14, 2009, Netanyahu delivered a seminal address at Bar-Ilan University, also known as Bar-Ilan Speech, at Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, that was broadcast live in Israel and across parts of the Arab world, on the topic of the Middle East peace process. He endorsed for the first time a notion of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. Netanyahu's speech could be viewed in part as a response to Obama's June 4 speech at Cairo. Yedioth Ahronoth claimed that Obama's words had resonated through Jerusalem's corridors. As part of his proposal, Netanyahu demanded the full demilitarization of the proposed state, with no army, rockets, missiles, or control of its airspace, and said that Jerusalem would be undivided Israeli territory. He stated that the Palestinians should recognize Israel as the Jewish national state with an undivided Jerusalem. He rejected a right of return for Palestinian refugees, saying, Any demand for resettling Palestinian refugees within Israel undermines Israel's continued existence as the state of the Jewish people. He also stated that a complete stop to settlement building in the West Bank, as required by the 2003 Roadmap peace proposal, was not possible and the expansions will be limited based on the natural growth of the population, including immigration, with no new territories taken in. Nevertheless, Netanyahu affirmed that he accepted the roadmap proposal. He did not discuss whether or not the settlements should be part of Israel after peace negotiations, simply stating that the question will be discussed. In a response to U.S. President Barack Obama's statements in his Cairo speech, Netanyahu remarked, "There are those who say that if the Holocaust had not occurred, the State of Israel would never have been established. But I say that if the State of Israel would have been established earlier, the Holocaust would not have occurred." He also said, "This is the homeland of the Jewish people, this is where our identity was forged." He stated that he would be willing to meet with any Arab leader for negotiations without preconditions, specifically mentioning Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon. In general, the address represented a new position for Netanyahu's government on the peace process. Some right-wing members of Netanyahu's governing coalition criticized his remarks for the creation of a Palestinian state, believing that all of the land should become under Israeli sovereignty. Likud MK Danny Dornan said that Netanyahu went against the Likud platform, while MK Yuri Orbach of Habayit Yehudai said that it had dangerous implications. Opposition party Kadima leaders Livni remarked after the address that she thinks Netanyahu does not really believe in the two-state solution at all. She thought that he only said what he did as a feigned response to international pressure. Peace Now blasted the speech, highlighting the fact that, in the group's opinion, it did not address the Palestinians as equal partners in the peace process. The Secretary-General of Peace Now, Yariv Oppenheimer, said, "It's a rerun of Netanyahu from his first term." On August 9, 2009, speaking at the opening of government meeting, Netanyahu repeated his claims from the Palestinians, "We want an agreement with two factors, the first of which is the recognition of Israel as the national state of the Jewish people and, the second of which is, a security settlement."
Arab reaction.
Netanyahu's Bar Ilan speech provoked mixed reaction from the international community. The Palestinian National Authority rejected the conditions on a Palestinian state given by Netanyahu. Senior official Saeb Erekat said, Netanyahu's speech closed the door to permanent status negotiations. Hamas spokesman Fawzi Bahoum said it reflected a racist and extremist ideology, and called on Arab nations to form stronger opposition. Palestinian Islamic Jihad labeled it misleading, and, like Hamas, demanded stronger opposition to Israel from Arab nations. According to the Jerusalem Post, some leaders advocated a third intifada in response to the speech. The Arab League dismissed the address, declaring in a statement that Arabs would not make concessions regarding issues of Jerusalem and refugees, and that we know his history and style of evasion, adding that the Arab League would not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Referring to Netanyahu's demand that Palestinians recognize Israel as the state of the Jewish people, Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak remarked, "You won't find anyone to answer that call in Egypt, or in any other place." Issuing a less blunt response, the Egyptian Foreign Ministry said that the speech was not complete, and that it hoped for another, different Israeli proposal which is built on the commitment to the two-state solution. Syrian state media condemned the speech and wrote that Netanyahu has confirmed that he rejects the Arab Peace Initiative for peace along with all the initiatives and resolutions of the Security Council to relative peace. Lebanese President Michel Suleiman called for unity among Arab leaders, saying that Arab leaders should be more united and preserve the spirit of resistance to face the Israeli stance regarding the peace process and the Palestinian refugee issue. He called on the international community to exert more pressure on the Israeli government to accept the Arab Peace Initiative, as he said Israel still has a will of military confrontation which can be proved in its offensives on Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. Jordanian Minister of State for Media Affairs and Communications, and government spokesperson Nabil Sharif issued a statement saying the ideas presented by Netanyahu do not live up to what was agreed on by the international community as a starting point for achieving a just and comprehensive peace in the region. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad referred to the speech as bad news.
European reaction.
The Czech Republic, which held the presidency of the European Union, praised Netanyahu's address. "In my view, this is a step in the right direction. The acceptance of a Palestinian state was present there," said Czech Foreign Minister Jan Kohout, whose country held the EU's 6-month presidency at the time of the speech. President Barack Obama's press secretary, Robert Gibbs, said that the speech was an important step forward. President Obama stated that this solution can and must ensure both Israel's security and the Palestinians' legitimate aspirations for a viable state. Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt stated that the fact that he uttered the word state is a small step forward. He added that whether what he mentioned can be defined as a state is a subject of some debate. France praised the speech but called on Israel to cease building settlements in the West Bank. French Foreign Minister Bernard Kouchner stated that "I can only welcome the prospect of a Palestinian state outlined by the Israeli Prime Minister." The Foreign Ministry of Russia called the speech a sign of readiness for dialogue, but said that it does not open up the road to resolving the Israeli-Palestinian problem. The conditions on the Palestinians would be unacceptable.
Stalled peace talks.
In 2013, Netanyahu denied reports that his government would agree to peace talks on the basis of the Green Line. In 2014 he said that Jewish settlers must be allowed the option of staying in their settlements under Palestinian rule.
Unilateral withdrawals.
On August 9, 2009, speaking at the opening of his weekly cabinet meeting, Netanyahu promised not to repeat the mistake of the Gaza unilateral pullout, saying, "We will not repeat this mistake. We will not create new evacuees," and adding that the unilateral evacuation brought neither peace nor security. On the contrary, and that we want an agreement with two factors, the first of which is the recognition of Israel as the national state of the Jewish people and a security settlement. In the case of Gaza, both of these factors were lacking. He also said, "Should we achieve a turn toward peace with the more moderate partners, we will insist on the recognition of the State of Israel and the demilitarization of the future Palestinian state."
Iran.
On February 20, 2009, after being asked to be the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu described Iran as the greatest threat that Israel has ever faced. "Iran is seeking to obtain a nuclear weapon and constitutes the gravest threat to our existence since the War of Independence." Speaking before the UN General Assembly in New York on September 24, 2009, Netanyahu expressed a different opinion than Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's speech at the forum, saying those who believe Tehran is a threat only to Israel are wrong. "The Iranian regime," he said, "is motivated by fanaticism. They want to see us go back to medieval times. The struggle against Iran pits civilization against barbarism. This Iranian regime is fueled by extreme fundamentalism." By focusing solely on Iran, columnist Yossi Melman speculated that Netanyahu's foreign policy took the Palestinian issue off the world agenda. After 4 days of shelling from the Iranian-funded Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Melman asked, "Is it worth initiating a crisis with Iran? Will the Israeli public be able to cope with Iran's response?" Netanyahu is reported to have formed a close, confidential relationship with Defense Minister Ehud Barak as the two men consider possible Israeli military action against Iran's nuclear facilities. The pair were accused of acting on messianic impulses by Yuval Diskin, former head of the Shin Bet, who added that their warmongering rhetoric appealed to the idiots within the Israeli public. Diskin's remarks were supported by former Mossad chief Ehud Dagan, who himself had previously said that an attack on Iran was the stupidest thing I have ever heard. A few weeks later, the Rand Corporation, a leading American think tank that advises the Pentagon, also openly disagreed with Netanyahu's belligerent stance. In doing so, and without naming names, Rand sided with former Mossad chief Ehud Dagan and former head of the Shin Bet Yuval Diskin. In a March 8, 2007 interview with CNN, Netanyahu asserted that there is only one difference between Nazi Germany and the Islamic Republic of Iran, namely that the first entered a worldwide conflict and then sought atomic weapons, while the latter is first seeking atomic weapons and, once it has them, will then start a world war. Netanyahu repeated these remarks at a news conference in April 2008. This was similar to earlier remarks that it's 1938, and Iran is Germany, and Iran is racing to arm itself with atomic bombs. In 2012, he used the opening ceremony for Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day to warn against the dangers of an Iranian nuclear bomb, saying he was following the example of Jewish leaders during World War II who struggled to raise the alarm about the Nazis' genocidal intentions. Israeli academic Avner Cohen accused Netanyahu of showing contempt for the Holocaust by putting it to political use, and former Israeli Foreign Minister Shlomo Ben-Ami similarly condemned Netanyahu's vulgar manipulation of the memory of the Holocaust. Immediately after the 2012 Burgas bus bombing, Netanyahu confirmed that the attack had been undertaken in coordination with Iran. Netanyahu stated during a July 29 meeting that, in his opinion, all the sanctions and diplomacy so far have not set back the Iranian program by one iota. And in August he stated that the United States only might respond to a massive attack against Israel. On September 28, 2012, Netanyahu gave a speech to the UN General Assembly in which he set forward a red line of 90% uranium enrichment, stating that if Iran were to reach this level, it would become an intolerable risk for Israel. Netanyahu used a cartoon graphic of a bomb to illustrate his point, indicating 3 stages of uranium enrichment, noting that Iran had already completed the first stage, and stating that by next spring, at most by next summer at current enrichment rates, will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb. Netanyahu delivered his speech the day after Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad spoke on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur, a presentation that the American, Canadian, and Israeli delegations had deliberately not attended. In an October 2013 interview with BBC Persian service, Netanyahu praised the history of Persia and said, "If the Iranian regime has nuclear weapons, the Iranian people will never be free of dictatorship and will live in eternal servitude."
Jonathan Pollard.
Netanyahu has repeatedly called for the release of Jonathan Pollard, an American serving a life sentence for passing secret U.S. documents to Israel. Netanyahu has called for his release over the course of several presidential administrations. He raised the issue at the Wye River Summit in 1998, where he claimed that U.S. President Bill Clinton had privately agreed to release Pollard. Clinton denied the assertion. In 2002, Netanyahu visited Pollard at his North Carolina prison. The Israeli Prime Minister maintains contact with Pollard's wife, and has been active in pressing the Obama administration to release Pollard. Netanyahu has characterized Pollard as a warm-hearted Jew, proud and a real Zionist.
Bank of China terror financing case.
In 2013, Netanyahu found himself caught between conflicting commitments made to the family of American terror victim Daniel Waltz and the government of China. Although Netanyahu was reported to have previously promised U.S. Representative Ilyana Ros-Lehtine that Israel would fully cooperate in the terror financing case against Bank of China in U.S. District Court, the Prime Minister reportedly made a conflicting promise to the government of China prior to a state visit to China in May 2013. Attorney David Boies, lead counsel for the Waltz family, told the Wall Street Journal, "While we are respectful of China's interests, and of the diplomatic pressure to which Israel has been subjected, those interests and that pressure cannot be permitted to obstruct the ability of American courts to hear critical evidence." In August 2013, Ros-Lehtine, chair of the House Middle East and South Asia Subcommittee, told the Miami Herald she raised the issue while leading a congressional delegation to Israel, stressing to Israeli officials the importance of them providing the Waltz family what they need for their lawsuit. I am hopeful that we can bring this case to a conclusion that is satisfactory to the family, but we need community support to not waver at this critical time, Ros-Lehtinen said. U.S. Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, chair of the Democratic National Committee, also spoke out on the issue with the Miami Herald. In South Florida, we all know too well of the tragic circumstances surrounding the cowardly terrorist attack that took Daniel Waltz's innocent life. I have been working, hand in hand with the Waltz family and the State of Israel to ensure any and all of those involved in this terrorist activity, including the Bank of China, pay for their crimes so that justice can be served.
Defense and security.
Since 2009, an estimated 60,000 illegal immigrants from various African countries have crossed into Israel. Netanyahu said that this phenomenon is very grave and threatens the social fabric of society, our national security and our national identity. In 2011, Netanyahu arranged for 1,000 prisoners to be swapped for Gilad Shalit, including terrorists with blood on their hands. Israeli officials estimate that 60% of those who were released resumed terrorism attacks. In 2011, Israeli General Staff concluded that the armed forces cannot maintain their battle readiness under Netanyahu's proposed cuts. However, Netanyahu decided to cut social programs instead, and promised to increase the defense budget by about 6%. In spite of this, the Israeli military still fell an IS 3.7 million short from its projected budget, which could damage their war capabilities. According to a U.S. State Department representative in November 2011, under the leadership of Netanyahu and Obama, Israel and the United States have enjoyed unprecedented security cooperation. Under Netanyahu's leadership, the Israeli National Security Council has seen an expanded role in foreign policy planning and decision-making.
Personal life. Family.
Related to the Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, the Vilna on his paternal side, Netanyahu was born in Tel Aviv, to Benzion Netanyahu, original name Eliyahu, and Sila, Tzila. Née Siegel. His mother was born in 1912 in Petah Tikva, part of the future British Mandate of Palestine that eventually became Israel. Though all his grandparents were born in the Russian Empire, now Belarus, Lithuania and Poland, his mother's parents emigrated to Minneapolis in the United States. Netanyahu's father, Benzion, was a professor of Jewish history at Cornell University, editor of the Encyclopedia Hebraica, and a senior aide to Zev Jabotinsky, who remained active in research and writing into his 90s. Regarding the Palestinian people, he stated that they won't be able to face the war with us, which will include withholding food from Arab cities, preventing education, terminating electrical power and more. They won't be able to exist, and they will run away from here. But it all depends on the war, and whether we will win the battles with them. Netanyahu has dismissed those who note similarities between his relentlessly hawkish views and those of his late father as psychobabble. For example, David Remnick has written, "To understand Bibi, you have to understand the father." Netanyahu's paternal grandfather was Rabbi Natan Milaikowski, a leading religious Zionist rabbi and JNF fundraiser. Netanyahu's older brother, Yonatan, was killed in Uganda during Operation Entebbe in 1976. His younger brother, Ido, is a radiologist and writer. All three brothers served in the Sayeret Matkal Reconnaissance Unit of the Israel Defense Forces. Netanyahu's first marriage was to Miriam Weizmann, who he met in Israel. Weizmann lived near Yonatan Netanyahu's Jerusalem apartment, where Netanyahu was based during his military service. By the time Netanyahu's service was finished, Weizmann had completed her own military service and a degree in chemistry from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In 1972, they both left to study in the United States, where she enrolled in Brandeis University while Netanyahu studied at MIT. They married soon afterward. The couple had one daughter, No, born April 29, 1978. In 1978, while Weizmann was pregnant, Netanyahu met a British woman named Fleur Katz at the university library, and began an affair. His marriage ended in divorce soon afterward, when his wife Miriam discovered the affair. In 1981, Netanyahu married Katz, and she converted to Judaism, but the couple divorced in 1984. In 1991 Netanyahu married his third wife, Sarah Ben-Artzi, a psychology major working as a flight attendant, whom he met while traveling on an El Al flight from New York to Israel. The couple has two sons, Yair, a corporal in the IDF spokesperson's unit, and Avner, a National Bible champion and winner of the prestigious National Bible Quiz for Youth in Kiryat Shmona. In 1993, Netanyahu confessed on live television to having had an affair with Ruth Bar, his public relations advisor, claiming that a political rival had planted a secret video camera that had recorded him in a sexually compromising position with Bar, and that he had been threatened with the release of the tape to the press unless he quit the Likud leadership race. The crisis eventually subsided, with Benjamin and Sarah repairing their marriage, and Netanyahu was elected. However, in 1996, reports emerged of his close 20-year friendship with Catherine Price Mondadri, a married Italian-American woman. Sarah Netanyahu has been the defendant of numerous lawsuits filed by former housekeepers, alleging abuse and underpayment. Netanyahu became a grandfather on October 1, 2009, when his daughter No Netanyahu Roth, married to Daniel Roth, gave birth to a boy, Shmuel. In 2011, No and her husband Daniel had a second son named David.
Relations with foreign leaders.
Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy and Netanyahu originally became acquainted when Sarkozy was the mayor of Neuilly-sur-Seine, after an introduction by a mutual friend. The two used to dine together in Paris and Israel. During the 2011 G20 Cannes summit, Sarkozy was overheard saying to U.S. President Barack Obama, "I cannot bear Netanyahu, he's a liar." To this Obama reportedly responded, "You're fed up with him, but I have to deal with him every day." Journalists covering the event were requested to sign an agreement not to report the incident. Apart from his relationship with the Obama administration, Netanyahu has close ties with the U.S. Republican Party and its leadership in the House of Representatives. Netanyahu and 2012 Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney have a close relationship that dates back to their work together at the Boston Consulting Group in the mid-1970s. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, a Democrat, has been friendly with Netanyahu for many years. In November 2011 and in the 2012 U.S. vice presidential debate, Biden stated that the relationship has lasted for 39 years. Netanyahu remarked in March 2010 during a joint statement with Biden during his visit of Israel that their friendship had started almost 3 decades prior.
Authored books.
International Terrorism, Challenge and Response. Transaction Publishers 1981. ISBN 978-0878558940, Terrorism, How the West Can Win. Avon 1987. ISBN 978-0380703210, Fighting Terrorism, How Democracies Can Defeat Domestic and International Terrorism. Farah, Strauss and Giroux. 1995. ISBN 978-0374154929, A Durable Peace, Israel and Its Place Among the Nations. Grand Central Publishing 1999. ISBN 978-0446523060